Because if Israel does effectively annex Gaza and populate it with its own population, I think there will be eternal conflict. I don't see any other way out of it, and now's the time to recognise it rather than in retrospect when it's difficult to do anything about it.
Yes, thank you for your excellent talk. I've always wondered, and maybe you have an answer, why was there not an independent Palestinian state established together with an Israeli state from the outset in 1948?
Why wasn't it established?
Yeah.
Well, of course, there was a UN resolution in 1947 which proposed the partition of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state, with Jerusalem as an international entity and with an economic union between the two states, effectively a confederation. It depends a little bit who you talk to. The leaders of the Jewish state, what became Israel, accepted the partition plan, but there's a whole discussion as to how and why, under what conditions. But in the final analysis, they accepted the partition plan. The Arab side did not accept it. The Palestinians did not accept it. But if you look at it through their eyes, as I tried to suggest earlier, why should they have accepted it? As far as they were concerned, they expected the whole 100% of the land. They're now being asked to accept something like 45% of it. And I'm not talking about a highly sophisticated, internationally connected people. Most of them were fellahim, peasants from the land, not really conscious either that there'd been a whole Holocaust of the Jewish people, mass extermination and so on. And they just, many of them today, many leading Palestinian intellectuals today argue we made a big mistake. We should have accepted it. But I think it's easy to say that today. Cast your mind back then. And then there was an attempt by the wider Arab world to eradicate Israel straight away. So the Egyptians invaded, and there was a war involving Syria and Transjordan, as it was then called, because it was just the East Bank. Transjordan only became Jordan after 1948 when it annexed eastern Palestine, and it then became known as the West Bank. It's a very new term, actually, the West Bank. Israel obviously defended itself, it then went on to the offensive, and it captured more land that was originally allocated to it on eastern Palestine, and the rest of it, the bulk of it, was annexed by Transjordan and became Jordan. The Palestinian question became forgotten from 1948 to 1967, and Palestinians were almost ashamed to call themselves Palestinian. They were called themselves Jordanians, basically. They were given Jordanian citizenship. Today, Palestinians are so proud of being Palestinian. It is, even though their situation is worse in many ways than it was then, when they see themselves as Palestinian first, Arab second, whatever else other identities they may have. So it was the way history worked itself out, but there is an argument to say that when Israel was recognized, it was recognized as part of a product of that resolution, and therefore it's still contingent on that resolution, or the essence of it, being implemented. And I would say it's perfectly reasonable for other countries to say that we recognize Israel, of course we recognize Israel, but it's still contingent on the recognition of Palestine and on the reality of there being a Palestinian state. And warn Israel that the two things are contingent on each other and you cannot have indefinitely the recognition of us all without the other side of the resolution being implemented.
We've got time to cover the question, but one of the facts.
I share other people's thanks to you all concepts. Oh, right. Yeah. Quick. US Secretary of State Blinken is endlessly going on about the international rules-based order. Yet the US ignores the judgments of the International Court of Justice, both the ones saying the interim order that there was plausible genocide, and the final order that the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank was unlawful. We also have the prospect of the Israeli Defense Forces attacking now the UN peacekeeping forces on the Blue Line in Lebanon. Therefore, what do we have left of the international law set up post-war in 1945, international humanitarian law, and so on? Is there anything left of it?
Well, that's a much broader question, of course. I think it's been eroding for a long period of time, and what you say I think is right, that some of the powers, the US is the obvious one, respects the international institutions and the international law and so on, for as long as it's within their interests. And when it ceases to be in their interests, there are all sorts of caveats and ifs and buts. I think the international order after the Second World War has been breaking down recently. There are a lot of people who are saying, oh, if only we had the Cold War back. We had the United States on one side, the Soviet Union on the other side, each could deliver its clients, I think is an exaggeration, but those who are at least partly dependent on them. So some of the big conferences we used to have, Geneva and Madrid, all connected with trying to resolve this conflict. The co-hosts were nearly always the United States and the Soviet Union, and they could deliver. The problem is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, and I am not regretting that, I applaud it and celebrate it, but it has its very negative side to it, because it was the beginning of the end of the breakdown of the system that was constructed, and nothing has yet come to replace it. Which is why I don't think you can look to international institutions per se to resolve this conflict. I look to the region. I mean, the Arab world has to grow up and be responsible. This is a regional problem. It's a problem within the Arab world. They cannot ignore the Palestinian problem. There's no point reaching agreements above the Palestinian head with Israel and make people like Netanyahu feel that they don't have to resolve the Palestinian problem because they can have peace with the wider Arab world. The people won't let them get away with that. These are mostly feudal monarchies, dictatorships. Their futures are uncertain. The stability of them is ostensible, and the only way they can try and bolster up their own rule is to address what remains the major issue within the Arab world. So I think it's a regional responsibility, it's an Arab responsibility. I think there needs to be a new Arab peace initiative, maintaining most of the elements of the original peace initiative, and embrace Israel, while also warning Israel. I think that's the way to go. And if we wait until there is a new international order, we will wait for a very long time, and meanwhile this situation will get worse and worse.
Well, I think, thank you very much indeed. You could obviously go on
I was just thanking Tony for what was an absolutely fascinating review of what is unbelievably complex and complicated. And as we saw so vividly in what you said, has been in this state of complexity and unresolvedness of what coming up not too far for a century. And is there a solution? there are many options, but that's about where we are. So can we thank you again for the extreme. Thank you.
Thank you very much.